This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Always happy for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure to have you with us. Well, tonight, possibly we could talk about a really important word that appears thousands and thousands of times in the newspapers, general discourse.
Could it be nomination? Have you changed your mind?
Oh, are you bringing up that again?
If we keep on hitting, keep those cards and letters coming, folks.
Yes, there's been quite a groundswell in some restricted circles about presidential aspirations. Once again, I have to regretfully say this is not my time, but maybe moving past that, Buck, the word is freedom. And so we use the word freedom day in, day out, and you could say this was the summa bonum of our whole world. It's the idea that why did you fight? Why do we struggle against evil? It's because we want freedom. And I wonder exactly what freedom is. Have people really gone through what does the word really mean? And is there a situation where there can be excessive freedom or evil freedom? Do you want to bounce the basketball? I know you want to talk about liberty, but yes. Why don't you? We'll start with freedom, which is a word I would say that was used more than liberty. But yes. What are your comments about that?
Well, I think these days, I think you're right. Freedom tends to be the idea in land of the free, home
yes.
of the brave. I would start by trying to answer one of your questions. I think you could view freedom in two ways. Number one, freedom from something, and number two, freedom to do something. And so negative freedom or positive freedom. And perhaps one of these may be better than another, or perhaps it depends on context. So I suppose that in the state of nature, since we were talking in a previous show about the Enlightenment concepts
yes.
that America came from, the state of nature, then theoretically each individual would have the freedom to, not freedom from, but freedom to do
yes.
essentially anything he could get away with, he or she could get away with. And obviously that comes with downsides, because if you couldn't get away with something, if you came up against a person or a group or an animal stronger and tougher than you, then this freedom to do something or to be something is not all it's cracked up to be. So in order to ameliorate the problems with there, we give up some of our freedom to do things in exchange for some degree of social security.
Yes.
So I guess that's my opening gambit regarding freedom.
Well, let's bounce the basketball a little bit there. And I think we're on sort of a profound mountain at this point. Freedom too would imply that it's your individual will, and you have freedom too means you're the actor, you're the person
yes.
that's doing something. But freedom from implies some other force is protecting you. So the idea is freedom from fear. That would be some other forces out there, the government, freedom from, I guess, hunger, whatever. There's some external force.
You're channeling FDR here in his
yes,
four
I am.
freedom
Four freedom.
speech,
Well,
yes.
but the idea is that what has happened in a curious way is the government as the bestower
yes.
of freedom, and the word, it doesn't really comport to allowing you to exercise your individual will, but it implies for the government to give you something, it's going to require that you give up something,
yes.
if I could say it that way. So in a way, if you're a dictator, and it's the way words work sometimes, you could say, I'm going to give you, I'm bestowing upon you freedom from, we could say insects, freedom from insects. and I'm the person that's going to give you this. On the other hand, to have freedom from insects, you're going to have to do the following 12 things. And we're going to restrict your diet in order to do something. So there's a quid pro quo that's attached to freedom, and it could be manipulated. A person could say, well, I'm fighting for the freedom. Let's say I'm a Nazi. I'm in Germany. I'm fighting for freedom. What are you fighting? What's the freedom you're fighting for?
Yes.
I'm fighting for freedom from, I don't know,
Nazi
Franco
oppression.
Majestic or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, people that are potentially on the wrong side.
Yes,
They're
yes.
Nazis, but they would say that they're fighting for freedom too.
Yes.
And so
freedom
the word
from racial impurity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
So the word is a very tricky word.
Yes.
And merely to use it is not enough, if I could say it that way.
Well, let me try. Let's make it personal to you. I'm now the government. I'm your sovereign Lord and Master, and I'm going to give you freedom from the struggles of the marketplace in terms of figuring out what your services are worth. That's complicated. It leads to competition with your fellow physicians and surgeons.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you freedom from that, and in exchange, you will simply have to accept the Medicare payments that I deem that you are going to deserve for your services.
So there's a hook, is there not?
Yes.
Oftentimes when people are offered freedom, there's a hook there, and intrinsic in the offer is a certain subservience to something that classically would be considered to be contrary to the original meaning of freedom, which would be freedom to.
Correct.
So the word has evolved, and the government has in many ways just used it in the way they choose. Now, just to go back a little bit, and maybe we could sail the ship back toward liberty. We're headed back in that direction. Because liberty really is really related to. It's more of a freedom to or liberty to. It's less from in the word.
I think that's its original meaning, of course, but it's changed as well. And once again, we look at the root of it. It means to liberate. And liberation is a process. It suggests to me or connotes to me that you are not free, that something is holding you in chains, something that's holding you in a certain status, something that is perhaps holding you in servitude, and you are now changing that status. You are moving from a condition of less freedom of action to greater freedom of action. You are liberating yourself from your chains, your conditions, or you are being liberated from your chains or your condition. Look at the French Revolution, for instance, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So they see it as moving or progressing in a positive direction. And once again, this is fraught with Enlightenment concepts, that Americans were using that term liberty even before the French. So the concept of liberty is written in the Declaration of Independence. The concept of liberty is written in the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, which was written, went into effect the same year as the French Revolution. So this idea of classical liberalism, once again, to free ourselves from the chains of the past.
Yes. If I could sort of take the word pursue it a little bit, I mean, the word libertine appears. And so the idea is that actually liberty, if you're totally free, your freedom to, that means that you can commit any kind of excesses. And so what we get into here is the limits that would justly be imposed on liberty and freedom to not injure other people.
For the good of society.
That's right. So
we're back to that social contract.
There is some kind of intrinsic limits to liberty and to freedom. I mean, you say that way, and the more tightly packed the world is, the greater the restrictions on liberty and freedom. Thus, we could say that even though the people are saying, well, we live in a free country, we do this and we do that, because it's a more tightly packed, delicate situation now, you can't easily shoot your gun, I don't know, at squirrels in downtown Macon, maybe not too late, or for firecrackers, or do all kinds of things that you might have been able to do in an earlier world,
Yes.
just because there's such a different situation.
But this
So
is
the
why
freedom-
God made Alaska.
There you go.
Yes.
Live in Alaska. Well, that's your choice. But so there are traditional limits to freedom and to liberty, and that if you're and you could even if you were not if you didn't injure other people and you had freedom too, you might actually make such tremendously wrong choices that in retrospect you could say, well, I was free to I don't know, try and jump off the cliff or do something just crazy, and I used my freedom to terribly injure myself.
Yes.
I was free to I don't know, take LSD or whatever.
Yes.
I had substantial mind changes.
Yes, and from the Judeo-Christian standpoint, I think you would say that freedom too is not all it's cracked up to be. So once we're thrown out of the Garden of Eden, we have the freedom to do anything we want. But does
Yes.
it truly make us happy in the Christian sense or in the Greek sense of eudaimonia? No, it doesn't.
So actually, the concept we're hitting a little bit here is the idea that a natural restriction of freedom is a useful, good situation. It depends. So there should be appropriate limits for that. So a person that is totally free, if you want to say that, would not have any obligation. There would be no. You could say that an obligation to another person or to a concept would impinge on the person's freedom. Yet, people that have no limits to their will, it's a contrary kind of situation, if I could say it that way. And even to continue, absolute freedom would be impossible because that nature imposes limits on our freedom.
Yes.
Our will is checked.
Yes.
You can't live to be 700. Whatever it is, there are all these limits that
Yes.
we can't fly like a bird. I mean,
Yeah, and this is why the state of nature is probably hypothetical, or if it isn't, it's something so far in the past nobody can have any type of memory of it. That no matter how strong you are, how smart, how capable you are not stronger and smarter and more capable than 10 other people who have banded together temporarily to deal with you. It's to make a modern pop reference. It's like the Hunger Games. That what you've got in the arena of the Hunger Games is a state of nature, but you also see many of the contestants making alliances of convenience to take out the opposition. So yeah, this is why we don't have the state of nature, why we don't see the state of nature as a desirable thing, because in the end, it always gets you. So
Yes.
we try to ameliorate the problems by creating the social contract.
Yes. Now, finally, as we go through our journey, our journey into this epistemological kind of discussion, what one could say, and I hesitate to use this word, is free will. So, if a person says we live in a free country and we keep pursuing the idea that you're totally free, some people would say, well, you can't be totally free because you've been checked by the way that you were created, the way your brain works, the fact you have 2 arms or whatever, 2 legs, or not, or sometimes not, and that you've been impacted by different kinds of stimuli, so that you're sort of a creature of those things. It's an illusion of freedom.
Yes.
And so that's a philosophical argument that doesn't appear too frequently, but maybe you want to bounce the basketball.
Well, yes, this is something that John Locke, who is, of course, one of the most famous adherents of the state of nature, had this idea that you yourself are conditioned by your experiences, essentially your sensory experiences from birth. The idea that you're born as the tabula rasa, the blank slate,
right.
And then as that slate is written on, that becomes your destiny.
Yes.
So, and I think you would find this true of some of the other Scots philosophers writing about the same
Yes.
time, Berkeley, Hume, for instance.
Yes.
So, and I guess that you can trace that forward somehow to Freud, that we don't even know what is driving us,
Or we
much less
could
control it.
try the B.F. Skinner,
Yes.
Skinner box, where they put the little rats in there, little mice,
Yes.
shall we say, run them around. Well, okay, so we've been through all this, problems with using the word freedom and liberty. Now, the question to ask now is why are these such iconic words? In other words, why is it that the French, liberté, égalité, fraternity, whatever, they blow the trumpets, they sing the Marseillaise, and freedom, when people say this is a free country, they're patriotic, it's 4th of July, why are these words so important in culturally? Why do they have such an impact?
Well, I think you were hitting it closely, but maybe not closely enough when you were talking about free will. It is, I would guess, the sense of self, the sense of other, that there's the world and there is me, and then from that you get to Invictus, I am the captain of my fate.
Yes.
And that if you do not live in a society or a universe that favors freedom, then the underpinnings of that can be yanked out from under you.
Yes.
That's my best guess. So
Yes.
maybe it's the psychological notion of self.
Well, that's true enough. What I sort of attempted to do was to say, this is the reason the word is just so nebulous. It has the meaning is kind of an iffy kind of thing. You can really go many directions with
Yes.
it. But maybe the thing is, you could say a person is free. People knew well what being liberty or free was. There was some alien imposition of will on them. So you could say, well, King George III, his writ doesn't go to Hahira, Georgia,
Yes.
whatever. Hey, we're not going to listen to you. So the idea is that I think it initially would start that some force, some slightly alien force that was impinging on people at a particular time, that force it went away. And so there was that force no longer impacted on their daily lives. And I think particularly the notion of freedom and liberty would be the serfdom or in Europe, or slavery otherwise, where another will imposed itself on you,
Yes.
and a will that was direct and personal and overwhelming,
Yes.
and that had gone away. So maybe that's what we could say. That was the origin of these iconic words.
Yes.
It's an assertion that those impositions no longer exist.
Yes. Well, I think in the American sense, you had this idea of frontier individualism, of a government that was very weak, it legislated very little, and let you make a life for yourself. And then, in the wake of the French and Indian War in the 1760s, you suddenly had the British government show up and say, we are going to start legislating and telling you, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Yes.
So it was going from a sense of freedom to a sense of not having it. It was an awareness that there was a power out there that was trying to restrict your freedom of action, that made you suddenly value it and say, no, we're not going to go there. You have to leave now. This is our country.
Yes.
So it was not starting with you being under the thumb. It was the thumb that came down. It was the coming down of the thumb that made you aware of this.
Yes, I would say in the American experience, but you could say in the European experience,
Yes.
particularly with the French, the
Yes.
idea that feudalism was still there, the king was
Yes.
there, a person that was a peasant was wandering around, and all these restrictions on things he'd like to do were imposed by an alien force in a way.
Yes.
And so what I'm sort of getting at in a way is these words are so complicated, they have a sort of archaeological
Yes.
tenor to them. This is a word that meant something. People knew exactly what the word meant in 1789 or 1776, exactly what the word meant, and it became imprinted in the country.
Yes.
But it's the notion of what it is now is a lot more nebulous.
Well, if I could take an example of that and move back to the word liberty for a minute, and I like that because there's actually been litigation on that word, a lot of litigation, and you can see how it's changed. That you can look at this word liberty in the due process clause, and depending on when you are in American history and who you are, you can read in any number of contradictory things. So for instance, if I'm a white slave owner, if I look at the word liberty, I can read into that the idea of the liberty to own slaves.
Yes.
If I am a slave, I could look at that word liberty and say, and read into it, the liberty not to be a slave.
Yes.
Fast forward 50 years, If I am a baker in New York, I could look at that word liberty and see into it the liberty to make a contract to work for as many hours a day as I want to, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day. If I'm a woman 75 years after that, I could read into that the liberty to control my own body and have an abortion if I want. So it's an empty vessel to be filled by whatever the social and cultural movements of the day come up with.
So just to continue on the subject, we partially, I think that's a good sort of train of thought, but it's sort of connected with will. I mean, so you have, this is what I wish to do, and I'm calling this liberty, and each person can, as their wills collide, each person has God may know. So this is the moral force of the society is behind me when I discuss what liberty or freedom is.
Yes.
So we have this contradiction about the universality of the word. It's a pretty interesting kind of situation. Now, when people look at the rest of the world, you've heard it said, well, we live in a free country. This is a free country. Well, what country would people say is not free?
I think you can make a good argument that every country is free in its own way.
Yes.
In North Korea, they are free from the degenerate Western capitalist acquisitive.
Free from the government protects
they're free from
them,
it.
yes.
Yeah. So, or you could reverse that. They are free to reach their full potential as contributing members of the workers' republic, or the workers'
Yes.
dictatorship.
Or if you lived in a theocracy,
Yes.
you could say our country is free from sin.
Yes.
Which is interesting if you think free to sin or free from sin.
Yes.
So, and we're going back to some alien force,
Or-
a
yes.
force has to purge
Yes.
to be free from something. An
Yes.
external thing has to be there, but to be free to do something is an individual kind of thing. So
Or, I mean, you could have both at the same time. Since we are in this theocracy, since we are free from these horrible secular influences, we are therefore free to be the community and the individuals that God wants us to be.
Yes. So, having parsed this out, should we create another iconic word to describe America? Can you think of any?
Well, I was hoping you'd come up with one.
Well, that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. I'll just
Yes.
pick. But I mean, I think we've had a pretty interesting discussion of this, and I've, as you know, I did a little discussion on China recently, and I want to go back to the Chinese. To us, this is the most important word, and what I would say is everywhere in the world, you would say, well, okay, if you wanted us to say we're free, okay, we're free, but maybe there is more important words in other countries. So I think the word in China, I think I got that right, means harmony. And harmony means that if you parse the characters out, it means having enough to eat. So we have a harmonious society. If you said, what kind of world do you want? You'd say, I want a harmonious society. And you say, well, you like a free society? They'd be a little puzzled. They'd be a little puzzled as to what that meant exactly. But you'd say, oh, I guess so.
Yes.
So I want a harmonious society. So maybe it's that every country is free, but to understand different cultures and different places, maybe picking out the word that you'd go through each country and say, pick a word that describes your deal. And,
Yes.
and the Chinese might pick harmony.
Yes. Well, I think it's interesting if it deals with having enough to eat, for instance, because that shows a kinship with those Lockean ideas of liberty again. Because if you look at the ideas of life, liberty, and property, or
Yes,
as Locke
right,
wrote it,
right,
life,
yes.
liberty, and the state,
Right.
these things are talking about the basic human needs of food, clothing, and shelter that play into that concept of eudaimonia, which literally means good spirit, and that you're living a life of contentment. You are in the niche that you're supposed to be in, which has its roots in that idea of liberty, but sounds very much like the harmony that you described.
Now, just one little spin I want to put on this, the idea of harmony. So the Chinese characters with that, this is like a mouth and food. Okay, you have enough to eat. And it doesn't go past that, just having enough to eat. But if you look at the English word lord, that literally means in the old Anglo-Saxon took it back, it means food giver. So a lord would be someone that gave you food, and then you would be subservient to the person. To be a lord means there must be peasants. And the relationship between the lord and the peasants is the lord has the power to give food to people, and that creates that sort of social contract. And the Chinese sense of harmony would imply that there's some force out there that needs to be either worshipped or kowtowed to, that's going to provide the harmony, an external force. And the fact that to us, actually, a lord is sort of a jokey term. I mean, you could use it if you call someone lord of, I don't know, the lord of love or whatever, sort of a jokey kind of thing or whatever. It's a funny word. But it doesn't really comport in our country, because the idea that you would kowtow to a particular person that had the power to give you food, and it just would not exist.
Well, you ask for one word that would describe a society, and I think that the word that American historians would use, of course, would be frontier, because of the role of the frontier in shaping the American spirit, the American character. And that frontier leads very heavily to individualism. So you are not beholden to a lord to feed you. You have fed yourself off the bounty of the land, which, of course, on the frontier, there are no metes and bounds, there are no property lines. You go out there without anyone's leave, you eke out a living from it, and you have no one to thank but yourself.
Now let's see, Turner, the end of the frontier, 1890. Did I get that right?
Very good.
Oh, it's
very
pretty
good
for an
That's
itinerant neurosurgeon here. But the takeaway message is that the country had changed a lot when the frontier went away, and it's true enough. If you look at the whole spirit of the place, conquering North America, I'll say the Canadians participated a little bit. That's quite a task, and all the compromises that were, I guess, made by these primitive Europeans to subdue half the world. Tremendous compromises and adjustments and things that were later generations would construe as evil.
Yes, because they're imposed on other groups that didn't have an input.
That's right. So you had this sort of cultural, I guess, imperialism, and there was a Christian mission attached to that. I think Messianic Christianity was a big force in the world. In this
the city on a hill. It still is. So.
Yes.
But to digress for a moment, it's interesting you should mention the Canadians, because the Canadians probably would choose a different word, according at least to Margaret Atwood. She says that the Canadian word would be survival, and she's really thinking about the inhospitable climate of Canada. As the starting point for that. But she'd say, Americans have their frontier, but Canadians would have survival, and that's what has toughened us up, and it's our perennial battle. So,
well, the impact of climate. I mean, we're sort of running around the bases a little bit here. The idea of freedom, but if you could say that one of the issues that takes place in the social contract between people is that if you're in the Garden of Eden, I mean, maybe you can sort of work your will independently. But in Canada, the environment was so tough that one depended on a sense of community that was probably stronger than in the U.S. Additionally, the impact of it's interesting two countries. One that kept the English monarch there, the other that did not, and how they played themselves out. And it appears the Canadians are extremely nice, pleasant, good people, but their social contract is sort of a Scandinavian kind of deal, if you want to say it like that. And the U.S. is a lot more let the good times roll, whatever.
I think
kind
the two
of place.
groups self-selected probably. So I think I would end with one more comment, and it's something that we've talked about before. If you're talking about freedom too, that sounds very much to my lawyer's ears like the word right. And of course, for every right, there's a corresponding duty. So if you have the freedom to do something or the right to do something, then someone else, maybe a lot of other someone else's, have the duty to acquiesce in that, or even to actively protect your freedom or right to do that. So zero-sum game, perhaps.
You could say, what is the land of the home of the brave, land of the free, home of the brave,
the
and
duty-bound,
the
yes.
duty-bound free people.
Yes.
Duty-bound. We rarely talk about duty.
That's not as fun as rights and freedom.
Right. It certainly did. Well, thank you so much, Buck. It's
Thank
been
you,
a
sir.
useful conversation tonight.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.